Welcome to the fourth episode of my interview series on Florida Man vs. the World here on YouTube. Today I'm interviewing Jim Shull, who is a retired Disney Imagineer who worked at the company for 32 years, with a career that spanned from EPCOT in the 1980s all the way up to Shanghai Disneyland in 2016, and finally with Avengers Campus at Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris in 2019. Jim Shull also posts on YouTube on his channel Disney Journey with Jim Shull every week. He gives very valuable insight about what is happening in the Disney theme park world right now, and he does so with a unique perspective as a retired Imagineer. He's definitely given a very different insight and different perspective that I don't usually see on YouTube and online in the theme park world. I will also note that when I was interviewing him around the end, before we were about to end, my house was likely hit by lightning, or we were in the middle of a lightning storm and my power went out. So it cuts out abruptly. However, we had a very long conversation, and I'm very thankful for my conversation with Jim Shull. We're recording, and I'm on with Jim Shull, a former Disney Imagineer. And do you want to introduce yourself, Jim?
Well, I talk about myself as a former Imagineer, but probably more importantly, I'm a retired Imagineer. I was at WDI based in Glendale, California, where our corporate headquarters is, and I was there for almost, well, over 3 decades.
And you have a YouTube channel now, right? You're not retired.
Yeah, retired is such an elastic word these days
Yeah.
because, I was creative, in creative, I should say. At WDI, for over 3 decades, I was in creative and as a creative director. And when you're in that role, those juices don't just simply dry up. So yes, to answer your question with a long-winded answer, I have a YouTube channel, which is Disney Journey with Jim Shull. How clever is that? Where weekly I have new episodes and I talk about the Disney parks from the perspective of a retired Imagineer.
And I've really enjoyed your channel. That's how I discovered you. I think you're pretty active on Twitter too, on theme park Twitter, maybe less so. But on YouTube, you're very active every week, and I always follow you. And you give a perspective that I don't think I've seen any other Imagineers as active on YouTube, or someone that's commenting regularly. So you give a perspective that I think is very valuable. You know, there's so much history with Disney parks that people don't know about. And you've had a longitudinal experience, a very long, you said 32 years. So that's what I think the value in your channel is, and it's regular every single week. I've learned a lot, not just about Disney, but you cover Universal as well. So you kind of give an outsider perspective to other parks. I was recently watching your video about Universal Studios Great Britain and how that might affect
Mhm.
the landscape in Europe, or Disney in Europe. So that's very interesting to me. I guess I would start out by saying, how does one become an Imagineer coming out of college? How did you enter the field?
Well, honestly, to answer your question, the simplest way is there's probably as many ways to get into Imagineering as there are, you know, ideas that you could come up with. The reality is WDI in Glendale, California is where it's based, but they have offices worldwide. Obviously, at each of the parks, Tokyo, Paris, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and of course, Florida. And there are a number of disciplines. I think at last count, there are about 800 different disciplines. So you might think to yourself, gee, I'd like to be an Imagineer. But I'm not creative. But I do love civil engineering. Well, there's a role for you. I like lighting. There's a role for you. Accounting, estimating, theatrical rigging. Again, there's a role for you. So I would say, the way to get into Imagineering first and foremost is think about what you're passionate about, and think also what you're interested in. What gets you moved about it, going to a Disney park? What thrills you? What you're passionate about? And then take those passions and apply them to what you're interested in, and then start to network. The best thing to do is, if you come from a university, WDI has some programs, or somebody might know somebody. It's definitely one of those hallway conversation environments where I know him and I know Shu knows her and they know them. And you find your way in through as an intern program, or maybe if you're lucky, you get a real paying gig day one.
So what did you study? What was your original, or well, I guess what was your career before you entered into Imagineering?
Oh, let me see. The answer to that is probably not what you'd think. I spent 5 years trying to, well, listen to my father, who's a photographer, professional photographer, who said, "Do not ever go into the arts. They don't pay enough." So I went into, of all things, the oil service industry. There's a little company called Hydro, not that little anymore, but they made blowout preventers and annular blowout preventers and ram blowout preventers and all this heavy equipment that you never think had anything to do with Disney. However, when I was working for this company, my manager called me and said, "Well, we know that you like Disney and you know our product, and they want somebody for this thing called EPCOT because Exxon is sponsoring the Universe of Energy. That's a pavilion, and they're going to have a little exhibit area in Communicore, and we're going to give them our equipment, and you're tagged, Shull, to go and shepherd this through for installation there in Florida." And that's how I got into Disney Imagineering.
Where were you based before? Were you in California?
Well, I'm a native Angelino, so yes, to answer your question, in our offices, Hydro were located in downtown, beautiful downtown LA.
So you have good memories of Disneyland. That's how you got involved with Disney.
Oh, absolutely. That was my family's retreat, and mine especially. I remember, well, again, I maybe I show my passion. Every year, I would have a birthday party and we'd have children come over to the backyard. And one year I turned to my parents when they said, "Well, what do you want your birthday party to be all about?" And I said, "I really don't want a party. I'd like to go to Disneyland instead." So I started from a tender age learning the art of negotiation. And, me and my one friend who I was allowed, we went all the way down to Anaheim and enjoyed my birthday there in the park.
What were your favorite rides at that time?
Usually, well, remember, I'm old as dirt, so there wasn't the kind of attractions we enjoy today.
Yeah.
Walking by with my buddy, we watched the Haunted Mansion be a building that just sat behind a wall because, well, the Imagineers hadn't gotten around to figuring it out and they were busy on the East Coast for the World's Fair. Uh, but when that opened, that was my favorite. And before that, it was Pirates. And later on, Space Mountain, was my favorite. So kind of whatever was the newest thing on Kid in the Block, whatever was the latest, that's what caught my eye, and that was my favorite. But I tell you, I do have a lot of love for the classics.
How many original rides are there still? I know Mr. Toad's is original. Is the Enchanted Tiki Room original there?
Well, define original. There was nothing there in the Tiki Room before there was a Tiki Room. And some things like Toad, there was a Toad, but the Toad we enjoy today is not the original Toad because when they built New Fantasyland, the old Toad was torn down along with the rest of Fantasyland because, well, Fantasyland, I won't say it was done the cheap, but it was done in the most economic way possible. And then a group of Imagineers, Tony Baxter, Tom Morris, and others, Chris Carradine, went out and kind of rebuilt the entire Fantasyland that we know and love into something better. And so the Toad you enjoy today is actually the second Toad.
Okay, I didn't realize that because things change so things have to change so much. That was almost 75 years ago, right? The,
Disneyland is celebrating, it's just celebrated its 70th anniversary.
yeah. Um, and when you're working for the oil company, when did you actually switch to Disney? Because I assume you got hired by Disney at some point from your work in Epcot.
They did. I caught their eye and they called me, and I had a friend who was at WED who put a good word in for me. And so that gave me some credibility. And they called me and we started a negotiation. And over a couple of weeks, I found myself with a letter in the mailbox inviting me to become an Imagineer.
So what was your discipline? Because you mentioned there's 80 different disciplines.
I was always in creative department, and I was hired in as a show designer. And what that basically is I would take an idea that other people had come up with and start to suss it out to see if it had traction, if it was a good idea, and put enough meat on the bones in order to then meet and show it to other people in the discipline departments, in project management, the estimators, uh, the schedulers, the technical disciplines to see this is a good idea, but test it out and probe it and see, is it possible? Because as I tell people, you need to have a good thick skin to be an Imagineer because after every 10 ideas you have, only one actually sees the light of day.
Yeah. But but not show. You're not talking about like a theater show for a Disney World, are you? It's
No, no, it actually it's a
or show
good
coming
point
up.
because show is a reflection of where WED really began. And a lot of it was there were no theme parks, not like a Disneyland before there was a Disneyland. So a lot of the terms were carried over from the motion picture industry. And so show design, show being anything that you see on a screen
Okay.
would be the show. In this case of Disneyland, the environment was a three-dimensional show,
Okay.
and that's the difference.
It's like an immersive movie, right? That's how they viewed the Disney parks. And were you there when Epcot opened?
I know I was not there when it opened. I came shortly after. My first memories of Epcot, though, were when I was down in Florida for other work. I found a way to get to the top floor and roof of the Contemporary Hotel, which gave me a really good overview of Epcot under construction.
Um, so at this point, you have to go to Glendale, right? That's where you start working. You kind of get stationed. It's almost like in the military, depending on where they need you, because there's multiple parks across the world. You end up going to the different parks. You don't stay in California.
No, no. California, Glendale, California is where the headquarters are of WDI. And originally, the headquarters of what was then WED, which were the initials of Walter Elias Disney, that company was stationed there on the Burbank lot, the Walt Disney, what's now Walt Disney Studios. It stayed there for a while, but after a while, for reasons, it needed to move. And so it moved to Glendale, California. And over time, on the city block of Sonora and Flower Street, it started to take over multiple buildings until now, today, it's the campus that we know and love.
And how many people worked on that campus in Glendale?
As a project-based company, the growth of the staff grows and shrinks depending upon how many projects are in work, how many are in the pipeline. So at any one given moment, you might have anywhere from 1,200, 2,000. It could vary, but mostly it's not really accurate or useful to provide a number because it'll change any day, month to month, year to year.
How many people are permanently stationed or are located in Orlando and the other parks around the world? Is there a contingent of Imagineers that stay in Florida, stay in France, stay in Japan?
As a rule, yes. What happens is if you're a French national or European national, you're more likely to be hired into an office there in Disneyland Paris and stay there. You might travel elsewhere, but you're likely to stay because you have French citizenship. And the same with Tokyo, Shanghai, Hong Kong. In the case of Florida and California, it's only a 5-hour plane flight. So there's no issue there.
And then in Japan, this is kind of Japan's different because it's not owned by Disney, the Tokyo Disney Disneyland Resort. Does the OLC Oriental Land Company still have Imagineers from Disney that stay there with them?
Well, there are always Imagineers from Disney who stay there with them because OLC owns and operates the Tokyo Disneyland Resort. But again, creative really rests with Glendale and Burbank, as it should, because
Yeah.
what you see in Hong Kong or in Tokyo are going to be the characters, the ride shows and attractions based upon those characters. So they just opened Fantasy Springs a year or two ago, and there they had character rides based on Peter Pan and Frozen and Tangled. And those rights don't reside with OLC, they reside with the Walt Disney Company.
They license those. They license the Disney IP to use in the parks, right? That's how it works. They pay
That's
the franchise.
that's my understanding. What the legal argument or legal language is, I don't think either one of us has had a chance to look at the master contracts.
It's probably very complicated. But then when they decide I want to make Fantasy Springs, they go to Disney WDI in Glendale and say, can you make this for us? And we pay you X amount of dollars for you to make this.
I don't think it's that clean or even it's beyond my pay grade to give you a sense of how it operates. And I would say in part of that is it's because every decade, every year, every management shift, conditions in our world, cultural shifts, they all impact the decisions that are ultimately made by OLC or Shindy or the Walt Disney Company or any of the other global partners.
So you started in the mid 80s. Did you, and I'm thinking a timeline, Disneyland Tokyo opens in 1989, and that's the same year, I think, or around the same time that MGM opens in Florida. Were you
Tokyo Disneyland opened before that because it followed very closely the opening of EPCOT Center in Florida.
okay? So, but were you involved in Japan at all, and were you involved in MGM at all?
I was involved with Japan more as a on the outer edge because I was part of the team that created the first Mickey's Toontown that opened in Anaheim, and Disneyland in Tokyo decided that's a really good land. Let's build one of those. And so having done the first one, I was involved, not to the same level as I was in Anaheim, but I was involved.
And that's based off of Roger Rabbit, right? The Toontown land, as that's where the Roger Rabbit ride is.
Well, yeah, and it has an interesting history. We covered that on Disney Journey, where originally it wasn't going to be Mickey's Toontown with Roger Rabbit. It wasn't going to be the vocabulary. There was going to be really an extension of what had been built in Mickey's Birthday Land in Florida, which became later on Mickey's Starland and then later on Toontown Fair. The idea, though, is that once Roger Rabbit came out and was transformational with that language and of how to take the world of tunes and bring it into a three-dimensional space. It was so evocative that, once people looked at some of our ideas for building a Toontown based upon the Roger Rabbit vocabulary and bringing and fusing Mickey Mouse and the other characters with that, we never looked back.
But has it drifted at all away from Roger Rabbit? Because I saw that he doesn't really appear anymore in the parks. And I don't know how many younger kids recognize Roger Rabbit as big as it was when it came out.
That's a good question. I mean, did you see Roger Rabbit when did you first encounter
Well, when
Roger
I
Rabbit?
was a kid, I wasn't alive when it came out, but I saw it as a
Mhm.
kid. That's one of my favorite animated movies.
Well, I think that, reality is some attractions, some characters are clearly evergreen.
Yeah.
They're just, part of our conscious. We don't even think about them, but they're there. They are in the back of our minds. But some others, like a Roger Rabbit, probably, has drifted in the further back of our minds. It might be there, but not really. And then you have some characters that unfortunately were not part of a hit film. And they're Disney characters or Pixar characters. And, they're not something that's probably going to see a ride, show, or attraction.
Yeah.
And they're not something that anyone would normally be able to name.
Now, if you leave the 80s, and were you living in Japan at all? Did you go to Japan at all
Oh,
during?
yeah. Yeah. I've had the great good fortune to live in all of the parks, all the countries where there's been a Disney park.
So when you go to Japan or China or whatever country it is, how long do you stay there for?
Totally depends upon the assignment. And literally, once upon a time, again, I'll tell you a story proving I'm as old as dirt. Downstairs in 1401, which is our main building, they used to have a travel agency, meaning that I'd get an assignment to go someplace. They'd say, well, guess what? You're going to Japan. Excuse me. Oh, we're going to have to, I'll start over. Um, what would happen is I would get an assignment and they'd say, well, you're going to go to Florida tonight, which has happened. And I'd go downstairs to the travel agency and they had a ticketing machine. They'd slide across under the glass an airline ticket. because before social media and having everything on our phones digitally, that's how we traveled. Piece of paper.
Yeah. And then, but you would go there for more than a couple days, right? I'd assume, and to whenever you go overseas to Japan.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends. Probably the worst, I wouldn't say the worst occasion. Well, one time I went over for what was going to be a week, and then 4 months later I came home.
And what was that? What was that project for?
That was for a project. Let's see, what was that? That was for the Aladdin walkthrough. And it was kind of an interesting because I went over there and leaving Southern California in the fall, which is no big deal because, France is still warmish, even if it's fall, because I'll be back in a week, I told my family. And then 3 months, 4 months later, I'm coming back and it's no longer fall then in France. It's cold and ice and drizzly and beautiful, but yucky.
Was that the park that you had the most impact on? Because I've heard you talk a lot about Walt Disney Studios in France. I feel like maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I hear you talk about your experiences in France the most. I remember you were talking about your the ham sandwich that you would eat when you were in
Yeah.
France.
Oh yeah, the jambon au fromage,
Yeah.
ham and cheese with a piece of butter and a baguette. Oh, that's good times. I always would get that as soon as I'd get off the plane and drive out to the site. Because believe it or not, I used to fly, and it was a 10 and a half hour flight, land at the Gaulle, get the rental car, and then drive out to the site. And I'd be there at 3 p.m. that same day. But to get some fuel, I would stop and get my jambon and fromage and a Coke Light and show up at the office to go to work.
That's what they call Diet Coke there, right? Coke Light in Europe.
Coke Light, yeah, Coke Light. But typically it's not refrigerated because I don't know why, but it's not uncommon that you get a twist of lemon or a twist of lime in your room temperature Coke.
So this is in the 90s when was Euro Disney, is that 92? 1990.
Yeah, it's Euro Disneyland opened around that time, and then I worked while I was working on it prior to that. Because again, going back to Mickey's Toontown, I was going to Mickey's Toontown back and forth because I was going to Vekoma. They built the ride, the Gadget Go coaster, and back in the day, you would go over, and it was more of an issue or an effort to go to France, and so I would go over there and I would spend 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. And Vekoma is in the Netherlands, which is a short drive from Mandeville, where Disneyland Paris was being built. And they would tag me as, well, you're already in the country, Shull, so show up here and plant some hydrangea plants or on Adventure Isle, or look at some color boards or be a gopher, a glorified gopher. And at that time we were really racing to build and open Euro Disneyland. So I would say I'd hear the assignment and go, "Yep, I'll be there."
I remember, I think I listened to you say that maybe I'm misinterpreting what you said. It's kind of a misconception how bad Euro Disney was from a financial point of view, because it did become a success later on, and now it's been profitable for many years. But was there a sense of dread or anxiety when you were building it with the company that they thought that it might not translate as well in Europe as it had done in Japan?
I think the reality is that Euro Disneyland was a success. I mean, it was ambitious. Certainly, it opened with 5,000 hotel rooms, a campground, a lake, a full dining and retail establishment, and it also had five e-ticket rides, which was pretty remarkable. And they weren't just the normal rides; they were rethought rides. I mean, it's amazing to think that they opened without a Space Mountain. That came later.
Mhm.
What they did open was a rethinking of Haunted Mansion as Phantom Manor, and their Pirates was and still is one of the largest, if not the largest, physical pirates that in any Disney park. And it had a lot of real moonshots, like a pirate that would swing from a rope overhead, and full movements on two pirates that were dueling it out with swords. It was a moonshot, and the park, I don't think it was a failure, certainly not creatively,
Yeah,
but it
no,
was probably overambitious as far as dropping something that big and that impactful into that space that quickly.
yeah. Okay, but it seemed as if Japan embraced it more than France did. Is that accurate to say?
I, again, it's hard to judge. I think there was a quiet acceptance in France of what Euro Disneyland was, and certainly today it's their park. They see it as their park. But Tokyo again different. They really wanted a Western park, and a Western park is what they got.
Mhm.
And in fact, as an example, I remember going into Tokyo Disneyland, their version of Main Street USA, and it goes by a different name, but it is the only place that if you wanted Japanese food, traditional food, that a Japanese restaurant resident visitor might want, that's the place that you'd find that restaurant. Everything else was very Americanized.
Okay. But that was the goal, though. They wanted it to be Americanized than the rest of the park, right?
Yeah, and think about it from their standpoint. Going to Disneyland, Tokyo Disneyland, was a place you go to get away from your normal life in Tokyo. And part of it, the experience of getting away was getting away to an exotic cuisine. Now, personally, I wouldn't think of a hamburger as exotic or fries as exotic, but they did.
Um, and in the 90s, there's a lot of famous Michael Eisner projects that were canceled. Like I'm thinking Disney's of America, Westcott, Disney Sea and Long Beach. How many of those were you involved with?
Let me see. I'd like to say none of them because they never were opened. Uh, Disney Sea, but let me back up the truck here for a moment. One of the things I've talked a lot about on Disney Journey is no good idea ever gets abandoned by WDI. It goes into a vault waiting for its time to come.
Mhm.
So in the case, if you look at the artwork for something like Westcott, there are ideas in Westcott that eventually found their way out into the world. If you look at uh, Disney Sea in Long Beach, there are a lot of ideas like they had a volcano as a centerpiece. Well, decades later, the volcano reappeared as part of Tokyo Disney Sea and Tokyo Disneyland.
And then with what about with Disney's America? Was there anything that was implemented elsewhere?
I think the emphasis on American history and reality was something that was transferred because Adventure Disney America was very much a world that was grounded in historical accuracy. Now, there were some rides there. They had a raft ride, which would have been, had it been built, the first raft ride in any Disney park. That had to wait until the Cali River Rapids in Animal Kingdom. That was the first raft ride.
And then there was what is it, Grizzly
Grizzly River Rapids was the second.
um why but when you're sitting from the sidelines seeing these projects get realized and that wasn't a part of your purview, right? Or what was your relationship to these projects? And was there
Well, I,
a fear
I
of
was
like I feel like Eisner was kind of infamous now for proposing these things and not following through on everything. Were you aware as an Imagineer that that might have been the case, or is that a retrospective thing?
I think it's easy to look at something with 2020 hindsight. And I think there's also kind of a three-step phase to it. You have the initial idea of that, Michael Eisner was a champion of. And then for reasons, that idea was not realized, not at the time. But the idea itself went into the vault, and you see elements of those ideas appear elsewhere many years later. So it's hard to say, oh, it didn't get built at the time, so therefore it's a lousy idea. You have to take a longer view and say, all right, does the idea have merit? And why didn't we build it? Once you can answer those questions, then you, I think, have the answer to, I think, is your question of, why didn't it get built? And is the idea any good? And was Michael Eisner just mistaken in being a champion of a Disney America or the Burbank Disney mall project,
Yeah,
which was an
I didn't know
which was
about that.
another idea.
So but does that the Disney Mall in Burbank, which I just heard you talk about, um, was it any different from like a normal mall, or is it just like essentially downtown Disney under a roof?
No, it was very, very different. And I think part of this ambition was a real problem. And not so much our problem is if you think of it from a mall standpoint, there's a certain template. Now the template's gone because our world's moved on from malls. My local mall here is still open, but it's not as successful as it was when it did open. And the mall in Burbank that Disney was proposing was very, very different. It was more of a, there was a shopping aspect to it, but there's also an attraction aspect to it, which is something that people had never ever seen before. And if you have the first of anything, it makes it oh so much harder to try to sell it.
What was the attraction aspect in the mall?
Well, let's see. If you go back and Google the Disney Mall in Burbank, it'll be cleared very, very quickly. But they had such things as an ocean. So on the top roof of the building, there was a lake, and there's a proposal that there would be an edge, and the water would pour off the side of the building, a massive waterfall. And just to get your attention, the waterfall would be on the side facing Interstate 5. So imagine tens of thousands of cars every single day driving between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And oh, by the way, off to the side, there's a multi-story waterfall coming off that building. That's sure going to get your attention, I believe.
So is this meant to be very close to the headquarters, the Walt Disney Company, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was in Burbank, so I guess that makes it close.
Is this somewhat similar to how we might imagine the Mall of America is in Minnesota? Because I know,
Yeah, except they have no snow in Burbank, so they don't have the same issues.
but I guess that's the idea of you do have dining and shopping with amusement aspects to it. Like they have rides in the Mall of America in Minnesota. Um,
Except have you visited the Mall of
I've
America?
never been there. No.
It's much less, the attraction component is less integrated with the shopping than was proposed for the Disney Burbank project. In Mall of America, it opened as Camp Snoopy, which is a fully enclosed theme park. And the reason is the obvious one is it snows. There are 4 months a year. You don't go outside. It closes the city closes down. Their local theme park, Valley Fair, is closed because you can't ride a roller coaster, nor do you want to if it's icy and snowy. In the case of Mall of America, they opened Camp Snoopy being fully enclosed. Later on, the Snoopy intellectual property went away to be replaced by Nickelodeon, which it is today.
And it was the weather aspect an issue when you were building in France? How did they perceive that? Because obviously California, Florida, we don't have weather issues with regards to cold. Florida, we obviously have rain and thunder. But how is it dealt with in France?
Well, in France, it's kind of the most obvious way of all. Having lived in France multiple times, one of the things I noticed is in California, when it rains, people don't go to Disneyland because it's Southern California. And after all, it does not rain here, according to the guidebooks. So people stay for the next day. Whereas in France, when it rains, it may be gloomy and rainy and cold and chilly for multiple months. And as a result, when I went to live there the first time, I invested in a heavy black wool coat, hat, and scarf, and dressed for the weather the way all the Parisians did and shouldered on. So when you went to Euro Disneyland, there is plenty of cover, but the park itself did not close. And there were instead arcades, so you could negotiate through the winter months and enjoy your day at Euro Disneyland.
The arcade, they have a covered main street, right?
Is a covered main street. And so that allowed you literally to go to the very front door, buy your ticket, stay undercover, and there are two of the arcades. You could take one of the arcade, buy your ticket at the front door, and stay undercover all the way back to where you pop out at Peter Pan in the back of Fantasyland.
How do you think that's going to work in Abu Dhabi? Because that's going to be a fully closed park, as they say.
I have no idea. I mean, there are some examples actually in Abu Dhabi with Warner Brothers World. And there, Warner Brothers World is a massive enclosed theme park in a building. They have a day for night environment, lots of lighting, lots of environment. Everything's either in the magic hour of dusk or night. We don't know yet what Disney Abu Dhabi is, and they're going through the process now, I'm sure, of designing what it will be. And any large project like Disney Abu Dhabi will have to go through multiple iterations before the there's final agreement on what it's going to be. And we don't know. We have an announcement, and we're probably some months, if not years, away from a real hard understanding of what the scope of the project is. We can make some guesses about where it's going to be located on Yaz Island, and I've gone over that on Disney Journey. Uh, but actually, what it is, as far as the attraction mix, whether there are going to be parades outside, how they deal with the heat and humidity, we don't know yet.
I think the only image we have is like as a low resolution image of the crystal castle, however they're gonna build that. There's nothing else that indicates anything that'll be in it. I think it's very limited right now, our understanding of it. But you brought up a good analogy of both. There's the Mermaid's Lagoon in Tokyo, Disney Sea, that's all under a roof, but that's just a land. But you also brought up Disney Quest as an analog to what it could be. How similar do you think it could be with Disney Quest? Because I remember Disney Quest as a kid being a giant arcade. Viewed it as a park. I never saw it as a park.
Well, it's a park in indoor. It's an indoor park.
Yeah.
Uh, it is, Disney Quest has its own unfortunate history. Disney Quest was a brilliant idea. Unfortunately, it opened at a time where several years after it opened, arcades had become passé. The reality is, you used to have to go to an arcade, usually attached to a mall, in order to play a game. Now today, you could simply, play a game on your phone or, you know, on your computer. You don't need to go somewhere
Yeah.
to play anything. And Disney Quest, I think, is a victim to that. As far as how that might apply to Abu Dhabi, I think you start with the lessons learned of what succeeded and didn't succeed, and then learn from that. And obviously, again, Warner Brothers is there on Yas Island in Abu Dhabi. They're expanding that park, and I'm sure Disney's keeping a good close eye on it.
The one question I have about it's not a concern because it's not my park, but I guess once piece of skepticism I have is it's not a very you think about California, very dense area. There's a lot of people in Los Angeles, Florida. People came to Florida, and the East Coast can come to Florida pretty easily. France, you have people all over Europe, but it seems as if Abu Dhabi, that's not a very dense area of the world. And what market are they looking for? And I think Michael or Bob Iger has said that there's some statistic about half the world is within a 6 hour flight or something. Are they looking for people like from India to visit and from Europe to visit, from Africa to visit? What is the market with the Abu Dhabi park?
Well, Abu Dhabi is part of the Emirates, and just above Abu Dhabi is Dubai.
Yeah.
And they both have massive airports, and there are direct flights from Europe and from India into that area. And a lot of people who, will go there for day trips or bank holidays. I have friends in the UK who will still go to Florida for their big vacation of the year. But if they have a bank holiday or a long weekend, they'll grab a cheap fare down to Abu Dhabi or Dubai just to get out of the gloom of a winter in the UK and enjoy themselves in the sun. So a lot of it is that market. Whether Disney can expand that market or extend that market, it's hard to say. But I'm sure it's consideration because otherwise Disney would not have said yes.
Is there any possibility that Disneyland Paris gets stuck in the middle where you now have Universal in Great Britain and then you have Abu Dhabi in the South? I don't know if there's competition there.
Well, I would take a different look at it. Is think about Universal UK. It's their competition may be Disneyland Paris, but they have competition right in their backyard because the UK has a really good, rich history of theme parks in that on that island. You can go to Thorpe Park or any of the other Merlin parks like Alton Tower and have a great day. And they've got good ride lineups, they've got coasters, they have history, and they're on a rail line. So first and foremost, I would say the competition for Universal will have to be the local parks.
Going to Florida now, what was your experience with Animal Kingdom? One thing that's fascinated me the most is looking into Beastly Kingdom and why that might not have existed. Were you involved in Animal Kingdom at all?
I did one little what might have been attraction with Joe Rody, but that was all. Except the biggest thing about Animal Kingdom is when I lived in Paris on projects, no matter how stressed I was, excuse me, when I was, I'll start over. You can cut that last burp out,
All right.
um, or not. Leave it as an outtake for your viewers. The reality is I did not deal much with Animal Kingdom. I did one Blue Sky project, but nothing came of that. But what I did do is spend a lot of time there. When I lived in Europe, when I lived in Orlando, I mean, I would just pick my weekends and I would walk the animal trails like Gorilla Falls or through Harambe and just de-stress watching the animal and the gorillas. The gorillas and I had an understanding.
I think there's still gorilla. I went there last summer. There's still gorillas. There's like 40-year-old gorillas that are older than me, older than me that have been there since the park opened. It's crazy to think how many animals are still there from opening day. And that's obviously the last park that Disney has opened in Florida. Meanwhile, you have two Universal parks that have opened since then. You have Islands of Adventure, Epic Universe. Do you believe that Disney will open a fifth park in Orlando? What would lead them to do that?
I think the question you have to ask is why would they do that? People have two things in their lives. They have time and they have money. And even if you had all the money in the world, you only have so many hours in your day. And the reality is a lot of people just simply allocate a week. So if you're living in someplace more than a day's trip from Orlando, you'd go to Orlando to spend your week. And once you go to the four Disney parks and maybe spend a day at the pool, your time is up. It's time to get back on the airplane and go home.
So yeah,
So
fifth park's
it,
too much.
I'm not saying it's too much, and it may be a home run, but also at the same time, Disney might decide we don't want to cannibalize one of the other parks by creating a fifth park. And that's one thing. It's one thing to take away business from a competitor, but you don't want to take away business from yourself.
And what I mean, it would probably cost an additional what, $2 billion to make a fifth park in Florida. I don't know. It would
No, no,
they would
no, you or me both. I mean, again, it's hard to say. It depends upon there's so many issues. What's the cost of time and material or labor
yeah.
at that given point in time? Is there any sort of a reason why you can't get concrete? Is there an infrastructure area? Is there a hurricane that suddenly decimates your site? We don't know. And that's one of the things about, I love being a Disney fan still. I was a Disney fan before I became an Imagineer, and I'm still a Disney fan today. Uh, but I want to really think in terms of what are the stories and what happened, and then ask us question of why did it happen? And if you have those two tangent points, then you can kind of think about, well, what is the future? What will likely happen next?
Why didn't they build Beastly Kingdom? They chose to build Dinoland USA instead, which is now getting destroyed in favor of
Dunland, yeah, that's kind of sad. I will miss the boneyard.
and then the dinosaur ride as well, which is completely going to get destroyed.
Well, and that and the old uh the restaurant, which I think is an understated gem in that park. The level of detail and the graffiti, and there was a payphone where there were phone numbers all around it and scribbles, and it just felt so real. And that was the biggest thing about Animal Kingdom in its totality. More than any other Disney park, it felt real.
hmm I mean, there's real things living there. And so I always thought that was the best theming of any Disney park when I went to it. I think it's the best theming out of all of them. It's also I feel like the most unique out of the whole world is those animals, right? That's pretty unique. Uh, and I also that was my favorite ride was always Everest growing up. I loved I
Hmm.
loved Expedition Everest.
So
Um,
I've got to ask the question of
yeah,
you: did you ever see the Yeti move?
I might have when I was younger. I don't know. I don't think I was paying enough attention to know. I was that was a
Oh,
roller coaster. Did you see it move?
I did. I did see the thing move, and it was amazing. It's actually not a surprise that it broke because it
Heavy.
was tons and tons of cantilevered weight on that arm that had to make repeats. And one of the things I love about being an Imagineer is trying to solve problems, because it's one thing to say I can make the Yeti arm move, but the question is, but I've got to make the Yeti arm move every single ride cycle, which means if I have
Hundreds.
X number of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people going past the Yeti every hour, how many times does that arm have to move?
Didn't Joe Rody famously say that he will make it move before he leaves Disney? That was just hyperbole?
I don't know. Joe is retired from the company, so
Yeah. I mean the perspective I always think of is people always complain, "Oh, I wish they had just spent extra money to figure that out." I'm like, "Well, when you have something ambitious like that, as you said, something that's so complicated, if it's that impressive and that complicated, it's going to break down a lot of times and the whole ride's not going to work, right?" I think people always complain about those B modes. They talk about like,
well, you're correct in that because one of the things as an Imagineering creative, lean creative teams, when I would have meetings, creative meetings, I'd go around the table and say, okay, this is going to break. What's the solution? And people would assure me and say, oh, it's bulletproof. We spent a bazillion dollars. It will not break, or it won't break very often. I say, well, okay, that's guaranteed it's going to break. So what is the B mode? What do you do when it breaks? And to their credit, I think WED has just, learned from that mistake. So let's take something like the Navi River Adventure, staying in Animal Kingdom. There, the shaman is fantastic, beautiful piece of animation, but it does break. And their B mode is a movie screen or a film screen or an LED screen that drops. And then you see the Navi, but it's a film of the Navi. Not as good, but at least it's better than, you're drifting by in your boat and you see this animated figure, dead with X's over its eyes. It's just, there was a solution. And that's the kind of thing you need to think about as an Imagineer is, solving a problem. But part of the problem solution is figuring out what happens when it breaks, because break it will.
mhm. I think people have talked. People say like, "Oh, I don't like Rise of the Resistance now because the cannon fire doesn't go off," and I always see it from the perspective of, well, if it was working, if they tried to get it all the time, then the ride would probably be down much more than it is now, right? So people never think about the time that they would lose. That were the times they wouldn't go on the ride in the park because of they have some complex mechanism that doesn't work.
Well, and I think you have to keep on, you keep reminding the management of the way things were supposed to be. Going again back to Yeti. When Yeti was built, it was really before social media. You and I are talking courtesy of the power of a computer and
Mhm.
Zoom about, but they didn't have that advantage then. Whereas today, people can ride through Rise of the Resistance. They publish photos and images and videos of those cannons. So no one can dispute those cannons move. They're
Yeah.
supposed to move. And there's very little footage out there that's around about the Yeti. So it's hard to remind people in the Disney management, oh, it worked once. The arm swung once, and
It's like
I
a
really liked it once.
it's apocryphal, like it's a legend that you don't know if it's like the Yeti itself. You don't know if it actually existed, but it's strange because that ride was right before social media. It was 2005, so that ride was right before Facebook and iPhone. So it kind of
Hmm.
missed the cut. If it came out 5 years later, there'd be all sorts of YouTube videos about the Yeti moving, but there's nothing.
Well, that's part of the world we live in. We're in an Instagram, social media driven world, and that's both good and bad. In the case of marketing for Disney company, when you talk about the Disney company and Disney parks, that's marketing for them. The downside of it is when the Disney park or Disneyland opens something like Walt Disney: A Magical Life. That theater was packed with people who were filming the performance of Walt. Unfortunately, they also filmed performances of when the animatronic failed, and Walt was bent over and broken, and that's the downside of social media.
That's the new attraction with Mr. Lincoln, right, in Disneyland.
Well, Lincoln, they tell me, is on the other side of the wall listening in for his moment to shine again when Walt finally stops his performance. Well, we shall see if I'm right.
It's on a turntable, right? I think it turns around. I don't know when they're going to retire Walt Disney.
I
Uh,
don't know. Maybe they could have I don't know, ping pong or a baton. They could have Lincoln start the Gettysburg Address and then hand it over to Walt and he could finish it.
have you seen it yet?
I did. I just recently saw it. And it's fantastic.
Okay.
It is state of the art. What gets me, and again, I'm because of my background. What blew my mind was when Walt is leaning against a table, gets up, and then he shuffles one foot forward. And it's a subtle movement. I don't think most people realize what they're looking at, but it telegraphs the fact that, oh, if that foot is moving, that means that foot's not connected to the ground.
Yeah, he's not planted on the ground like a normal.
No, no, and you're not supposed to be. It's deflection because you're not looking at the leg that is planted on the ground. You're looking at the one that moved forward.
Yeah, because I think about the Hall of Presidents and everyone's just standing in place. They don't move around. They get
No,
up and they don't do anything else.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, I'm not sure that President Buchanan moved around even when he was alive.
yeah, he's just sitting in the chair there. There's a lot of presidents that didn't move around. Um,
No.
and then Hong Kong. Did you have any involvement in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I did. I worked on a couple of projects, some of that did not see the light of day, but that was the second Toy Story land. After the first one, which while we were just about to open it in Paris, I got the word that they're going to do another one for Hong Kong Disneyland as part of what they called Chili Pepper, which were three additional new mini lands for that park. They added Grizzly Peak, Mystic Manor, and then Toy Story Land.
What do they have the raft ride there in Grizzly Peak? What do they have there?
No, they have their version of Thunder Mountain. It's not Thunder Mountain. It's not Rainbow Ridge. It's more what I call the New West. It's kind of a movie set west. If you look at some of the images, the buildings look more pristine, more elaborate, not old, not weathered, not burn and brush wood. It looks much cleaner, more of a movie set, which makes sense because the local guests there in Hong Kong, they have no idea of what the 1880s Old West in America meant or was or why it was of value. They take it for what it was. So they see a mountain with a bear carved into the side. They see a mine train coaster being launched at high speeds, family friendly, but still high speed. And they see other buildings and they see a water play area and they take it for what it is. It's a definitely a new environment, unique for Hong Kong, and they accept it on the basis of what it is.
Was that the park that had the most, or the resort that had the most financials issues in the beginning? Because I felt like it was not in the black for many, many years after it opened in 2005.
I think you'd have to confirm that by going back to the public information. It's there's a partner that Disney has in Hong Kong, and whatever publicly released financial information would be the place to go for that.
Okay. And then around the same time, what was your experience in Walt Disney Studios in Paris?
Oh, that was a long time I spent there. Um, I was part of the team that got that park opened and kind of never left. I worked on some of the ideas that were incorporated into what became Toon Studios and led the creative effort for that. Then later on pivoted, worked on the first Toy Story Playland and then Ratatouille, and then finished up working on the redo of the industrial backlot, which became the second Avengers Campus.
Do you think that the rebranding and the expansion with was Disney Adventure Park, or Disney Adventure World, is going to fix the issues that they have with the park now?
I think that's part of the issue you just touched on. You didn't say Adventure World immediately. You said
I didn't know
Adventure
that.
Land.
You're saying I didn't know the name. It doesn't, it's not significant enough or memorable enough.
Yeah, I'm sure that when they go to reopen the park next year, they'll do a lot of rebranding, a lot of marketing, and probably be an inescapable name. Uh, to answer your question, I don't think people really think that hard. I think the reality is if you go to a Disney park, you go for an escape and you're not interested so much in what the thing is called as what it is when you get there. Like, for example, what is a Disneyland? We talk about a Disneyland, but what is a Disneyland? Oh, it's a place you go to see Tour of the Century America and a tropical forest and a fantasy world and the Old West. That makes a Disneyland. And in the same way, Adventure World, I think they're going to have to write their own identity. It started as a movie park. It still kind of is a movie park. The first step was their new world premiere covered version of the functionality of a Main Street. What I do love about it, and I think is a brilliant decision, was at the end of their Main Street, you have a marquee, a movie film marquee, and they have an exit. So you exit into the park, basically going through the movie screen into the real world from the movies. And I think that's simple, immediately understandable by the guests, and will be very successful.
Is it true that that park though is kind of just to fill the contractual obligation of two parks in France?
Oh my, you're putting me on the spot. I believe that the master agreement for Euro Disney did state there'd have to be a second gate.
So there's, I mean, there's rumors and perceptions that that was a rushed park and it's a smaller park. Is that related to the contract at all? What was your
Oh, I don't think anyone at WDI. In fact, I'll say this, standing on solid ground, no Imagineer ever sets out to do something quick or cheap. We are a project-based company and we do the very best job we're allowed to do.
Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, you're never gonna go in thinking you're gonna do a half-baked job on a project. You put the fullest extent to every project. Um,
No, I've never met an Imagineer who did
yeah,
not give absolutely 150% of their all. And the reality is, think about it. If your choice is you can spend, your 3 years of your life working on something mediocre or 3 years of your life working on something great, you're going to try to do something great because
yeah,
either great or mediocre, you're still going to be spending those years.
yeah. It's a long time to build a park, and you'll be living there. And then was Shanghai your last project that you did? Major.
No, the last project is what we talked a moment ago. My very last project was the development of the Avengers Campus in Disney Studios Paris.
Okay, is that 2019? When is that?
Oh, it was just before we wrapped up that work just before COVID in 2020.